Last week I did a Ghoul Talk on the trans athlete debate. This past week, a state legislator of New Mexico, Representative Zachary Cook, introduced a bill, HB 304, that would prohibit trans women and girls from competing in women and girls sports. By his own admission, Representative Cook knew very little about the issue, admitting that he only really started looking into it in the days preceding this committee hearing.
House Bill 304 is the Protect Women's Sports Act. This bill was brought to me by a woman I know in Clovis who asked me if I was aware of the situation of males competing in female sports, and I told her only superficially from what I've seen in media accounts of it. Madam Chair, and because I've only learned a lot about this subject in the last few days, more than anything, a week or so, by talking with Ms. Chart with Women's Liberation Front and just doing my own homework. But I would like to hand it over, Madam Chair, if it's okay with you, and let Natasha Chart take over from more of the policy perspective and why we would want to do this.
Here's why this matters. As the committee members questioned Representative Cook, committee member Brittney Barreras noticed that the language in the bill was very similar to a bill introduced in the North Carolina State Legislature.
During public comment, it was brought up that there's some mirrored legislation out there brought forward by the Alliance for Defending Freedom. And the reason that I bring that up is because HB 3477 from South Carolina has mirrored wording to your bill, Representative. And so my question is, where did the language for this bill come from?
Madam Chair and Representative, I worked with the Women's Liberation Front to draft the language of this bill. I don't have any idea who the Alliance for Defending Freedom is.
Another committee member, Randall Pettigrew, asked about the inclusion of a certain case law, United States versus Virginia.
Page 2 of the committee sub, line 10 references United States versus Virginia. Madam Chair, Representative, can you tell me the Reader's Digest version for engineers, what that lawsuit was about?
Madam Chair and Representative, first of all, I would tell you that if this bill were to pass committee, it would go to Judiciary. And in the meantime, I would probably redraft that because we don't typically put in citations to court cases. Findings is actually including legislative findings in a bill is something we don't do typically in New Mexico either. But the drafting of this bill, as I reviewed it prior to the committee, it became clear to me that there's other drafting errors as well that I'll deal with if it were to pass.
Representative Cook responded that inclusion of such case law is not typical to New Mexico legislative procedure. It's worth noting that the bill references 3 previous court cases: United States versus Virginia, Petrie versus Illinois High School Association, and Klesick versus Rhode Island Interscholastic League Incorporated. First off, you'll notice that 2 of these cases are from different states, and the other is federal. You may also notice that the most recent case law cited was from 1992. That's 29 years ago. Tell me, what did you know about gender 29 years ago? But again, Representative Cook suggests that since he didn't come up with this legislation that he is presenting, this must have flown under his radar. So let's bear in mind that this legislation was drafted, at least in part, by the Women's Liberation Front. Let's learn a little bit about them. So they work to protect, advance, and restore the rights of women and girls. That's good. And what's super interesting, since this is ultimately a conversation about language and where the bill's language originated, they've published their own style guide. Surely this style guide informed the language of the bill, so let's take a look. So real quick, there is going to be a content warning here for some transphobic language. Okay, the introduction mentions journalistic ethics, including truth and accuracy, independence, fairness and impartiality, humanity, and accountability. This is all good stuff. Let's see how they treat transgender individuals. All right, first off, they prefer the term LGB to any more expansive terms like LGBTQ. So right off the bat, they are literally excluding trans people. Okay, and they also recommend misgendering and dead naming trans individuals. Here are some common terms to avoid according to the Women's Liberation Front: gender identity, cisgender, transgender, trans woman, man, etc., non-binary, sex assigned at birth, and TERF. Now, this one I personally love because TERF, of course, means trans exclusionary radical feminist. And their suggestion is to simply use the term radical feminist, which is how they describe their own organization.
I'm the executive director for Women's Liberation Front, a radical feminist organization with 890 members across the country and in New Mexico.
So they're kind of admitting that they're trans exclusionary. So here we've got, instead of calling a transgender woman, the Women's Liberation Front recommends calling a transgender woman a man who identifies as a woman. Of course, this is antithetical to the reality of sex and gender. Here's one. This is particularly important. Instead of trans students are fighting discrimination in girls' sports, which is just an empirical fact, they want you to say male students are fighting for the ability to participate in girls' sports. Look at that. Very, very relevant to our case right now. So, here's where we're at. This is an organization that literally tells journalists to lie about the reality of transgender individuals, and they're writing legislation that affects trans people. That's pretty bad, I'd say. So here's what we do. We're going to go to this website. I'll put a link in the description. Go ahead and find your state. If your state has any pending legislation that discriminates against trans athletes, I want you to follow it. Figure out when it's being discussed in committee or on the floor, and show up to make your voice heard. Call your state legislators. Do everything in your power to stop these discriminatory bills from going any further. I find it super concerning that this clearly anti-trans organization can just hand a bill to a state legislator who, by his own admission, doesn't really understand it, and that legislator will give them a platform.
Do you know that 40%, that's almost half of all trans youth will attempt suicide at least once? Did you know that, Representative, Madam Chair?
Madam Chair, I did not know that.
This is bad, and we should stop it. Thanks for watching. Again, please do your research into what your state is doing to discriminate against trans people, and let's work together to stop that. If you like this video, go ahead and like and subscribe, ring the bell, give me a comment. If you like this style, it's a little less video essay-y, but still semi-scripted. I don't know. If you like it, let me know in the comments. If you hate it, let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.
Music.